the 30th of July. Right now, chaos has erupted in Sebastopol. Boom! Neptune missiles are attacking Crimea.
Get down! Get down!
Hundreds killed. The target is burning military equipment.
They shot it down. It exploded on its own, so they missed it.
The remnants of the Russian Armed Forces Black Sea Fleet are currently being destroyed. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are carrying out Russia's air defense system in Crimea feet first. Boom! Bada boom! Wow! And for an encore, an attempt by Russian occupiers to cross the Dnipro in the temporarily occupied part of Kherson region ended before it even began. All were destroyed.
Didn't work. That's serious. Hey! 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 Hey!
The GUR, SBU, and Ukrainian Armed Forces are carrying out a brilliant special operation in Crimea, Moscow, the Moscow region, St. Petersburg, and Kaliningrad. The GUR even reached Russia's far east, setting off explosions. We'll discuss all this with Roman Svitan.
Fly! Fly! Breaking news!
Friends, and this is sensational. The Kremlin is in a panic. Putin is urgently convening the Security Council because the GUR has carried out a brilliant special operation in Moscow, the Moscow region, St. Petersburg, Crimea, and Kaliningrad. The remnants of the Russian Armed Forces Black Sea Fleet have been destroyed. Russian occupiers' attempt to cross the Dnipro in occupied Kherson region ended quickly, before it even began. Moreover, Neptune missiles are striking Crimea. Ukraine's defense forces are taking out Russian air defense systems in Crimea feet first, preparing for the deoccupation of the peninsula. Evacuation has begun on the peninsula. Right now, the line for the Crimean Bridge is enormous. Moreover, the GUR attacked an energy facility in Russia's Kaliningrad, cutting power to a Russian defense industry enterprise. Ukrainian long-range kamikaze drones attacked the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan. There are several factories located there, including the production of Shahed drones, also known as Geran 2. And the AFU also attacked the occupiers' airbase in the Voronezh region. Everything is on fire there. The AFU also attacked Nevinomysky Azot in the Stavropol region. This is a factory, and in Russia's Samara region, the Novokuibishevsk catalyst plant was attacked. It is part of the Rosneft structure. And a new video has appeared showing the crash of a Russian Su-25 near Soledar. It was friendly fire, as I understand it, shot down by another Russian aircraft. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, what do you think of the GUR special operation? They are joining forces with the SBU and starting to carry out a series of actions. For example, Kaliningrad near St. Petersburg, the Moscow region, Moscow. What do you think?
We once described these people with you, those who do this kind of work, the concerned citizens. These are concerned people in Russia, ranging from Maltsev's partisans to the resistance forces of the republics, who are trying to break free from Russian oppression and destroy this Russian prison of nations. they are working towards our victory as well. First and foremost, they are working for themselves, destroying the Russian economy, dismantling Russian mechanisms, including military ones. And naturally, this helps us. And of course, we will stand firmly behind them for this. And we thank our friends for this kind of work. Sometimes certain actions are carried out under the guidance of our special services, the Foreign Intelligence Service, the Main Intelligence Directorate, the Security Service of Ukraine, and our Border Guard Intelligence, which also participates in these operations. So all these concerned individuals, sometimes regarding certain military targets, are overseen by our special services. That's why there's now such a wave sweeping across Russia, a very specific one, and it's also connected to the destruction of the Russian oil and gas and oil industry. It's very easy to destroy it. Some of the concerned individuals simply set fire to forests through which Russian Gazprom pipelines or oil and gas lines, whatever they're called, run, and they just burn down. Pipelines burn, oil pumping stations burn, inspection hatches burn, so-called air vents, inlet and outlet manifolds at oil refineries all burn. In other words, they are working very hard, powerfully, and even in enclaves, including by the GUR. At least the GUR boasted that in the Kaliningrad region, they took out a power installation, basically shut down, cut off power generation in that area. Well, I mean, good job, impressive. Of course, it's unlikely that the GUR itself was directly involved. The task was probably carried out either by GUR's confidants or by concerned citizens. A huge thank you to them for that.
Friends, please like this video. Write a few kind words to our special services in the comments. This is very important for the Armed Forces of Ukraine and the Main Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense. It is very important. And in the comments, let us know where you're watching from and write a few warm words in support of Ukraine. Roman Grigorievich, when we talk about Kaliningrad, how important is it to strike at Russia's military-industrial complex there, considering that a zone of turbulence might arise there?
Well, the Kaliningrad region is a true exclave, squeezed between two countries, Poland and Lithuania, up against the Baltic Sea. There is absolutely no direct connection with Russia. Through Belarus, via the Suwałki corridor, it's about 100 kilometers. It's just not realistic. Of course, there are several ferries running across the Baltic Sea. Some depart from St. Petersburg. There are a few ferry crossings, a few ship routes, and naturally military ships as well. So both civilian vessels and military ships are around. But it's an exclave, which makes it very difficult to defend. The Russians understand this perfectly well. And practically the entire exclave, the whole Kaliningrad region, König, to be precise, meaning Kaliningrad, which is often called König. Even the people of Kaliningrad themselves understand perfectly well that it's really a German city, Königsberg. That is, yes, there are still serious shipyards left there from Germany, from that war, from the last millennium, for the production of military vessels. So they still build them there, and some of them even end up with us, including in the Black Sea. It is there, produced at these shipyards, very serious ones. Of course, that part of the Baltic fleet is stationed, specifically the Russian Baltic fleet, which is located precisely in Königsberg, in the Kaliningrad region, or let's just call it Königsberg. I like that better. And naturally, there is also aviation. A fairly large number of troops are stationed there. That is why it is very important for us, but not only for us, of course. It is primarily important for the Baltic countries and also for NATO to limit the expansion of Russia's military presence in this exclave. There are various mechanisms for this. Moreover, for example, right now we have the right, since Russia is the aggressor, we have the right to destroy any Russian military targets anywhere, wherever they may be located. It doesn't matter at sea, on land, in the fourth dimension, in Antarctica, anywhere at all. A military target can be destroyed, and our special services can do this, and most likely are doing it. We have repeatedly said that operations are being carried out in Königsberg, and quite successfully.
Roman Grigorievich, brilliant news from temporarily occupied Crimea. First of all, Neptune missiles regularly strike. There they attack military bases and airfields. And now the defense forces of Ukraine are simply wiping out Russia's air defense system in Crimea. We are destroying this system, and everyone is saying that this is part of the preparation for the deoccupation of the peninsula, and evacuation has now begun on the peninsula. I checked just an hour ago and there were huge lines at the Kerch Bridge. What do you think about that?
Well, the thing is, any operation to deoccupy will start with an air attack. And any air attack begins with achieving air superiority, meaning the destruction of the enemy's air defense. First, the ground-based systems, and then naturally the airborne one. And right now, we're actually witnessing the beginning of this operation. Although, to be honest, from military perspective, it's a rather weak start. Look, every week we talk about something flying over Crimea. They hit something here, they hit something there. There's no systematic approach to the war. What does a systematic approach mean? It means every day, every night, ideally at night, so that fewer civilians suffer, regardless of whether they're Russian civilians or our own steadfast Ukrainians who are there. We don't target civilians. For us, it's very important to shield civilians from direct strikes, and then preferably at night, to take out military targets, anti-aircraft missile systems, and enemy military facilities. But this needs to be done properly and skillfully. However, the frequency is still insufficient. This should be happening every night. But as it is, it happens about once a week or even once every couple of weeks. That's far too little. This issue, if, for example, we're talking about the Neptunes. Neptune is a so-called cruise missile system, which is currently overseen by Mij Papa, that is the commander of the Ukrainian Navy, the naval forces of Ukraine. He should have an entire unit or a dedicated direction focused on the liberation of Crimea. In fact, it should be our naval forces that are responsible for the liberation of Crimea. That's the optimal approach. Within their structure, there should be a branch of the armed forces. We've said this so many times already. It was a bit of a mistake to create a unified branch, the unmanned systems forces, because their own unmanned systems forces should be established within the Navy, within the naval forces, so that they can operate underwater drones, surface drones, and aerial drones, plus the same Neptunes. Neptune, let me repeat, is a missile of a coastal missile system that is directly subordinate to the Navy. And so having a sufficient number of forces and assets of this level, plus it is absolutely necessary to reassign at least one squadron of, say, Mirages, for example. Mirages as naval aviation to operate against maritime targets and ground targets in Crimea. And then this process will set the task not from the Navy. Here, you give him a specific task liberating Crimea so that he focuses solely on Crimea and nothing else. Our sailors should be engaged in the liberation of Crimea, and then it will become a planned, systematic effort, daily and nightly work to drive the Russian presence out of Crimea. If this systematic work begins, those lines you mentioned at the Kerch Bridge, believe me, remember we talked about swimming crawl, breaststroke, and doggy paddle. That's the optimal scenario, because not everyone will be able to cross the Kerch Bridge.
Roman Grigorievich, while preparing for our interview today, I noted that the occupiers do not have a sufficient number of available air defense systems, but they continue to concentrate them in Crimea. Their fear of a Ukrainian offensive is the reason, claims Crimean native and former spokesperson of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Vladislav Seleznev. Occupiers believe a seaborne landing is possible. So for the third year, they've built fortifications along the coasts of Chornomorske, Yevpatoria, and Simferopol districts. This defense line is destroyed by storms annually, but they keep restoring it. This only means one thing: the occupiers are not confident in Crimea's defensive capability. What do you think? That was a quote.
Believe me, I once served back in the Soviet Union. I started out in the Soviet army. This is a bit of a different task. This is the kind of thing you do when there's nothing else to do. They just assign some task to keep the personnel busy. Look, there are several tens of thousands of Russian troops in Crimea. They have nothing to do there. Well, maybe spy on girls at the beach with binoculars, and so that they don't get any stupid ideas in their heads, they give them shovels and assign them to dig up Crimea back and forth, knowing full well that the first storm will cover up everything they've dug. Then they're given the same task again, and once more they dig everything up back and forth. Back in the Soviet Union, they used to paint leaves and yellowed grass green. Well, that's what they call the connection between space and time. You pick up a shovel and dig a trench from lunch to dinner. The connection between space and time, so that's basically how it is. It's exactly the same picture. It's pointless work, but it keeps the Russian troops occupied with at least some kind of task, so they keep busy. Basically, it's all for the overall strategic objective. That's right. But the thing is, an amphibious landing in Crimea is only possible after we liberate Skadovsk. and an amphibious landing in Crimea from Skadovsk to Crimea is 50 kilometers, and to Skadovsk is 50 kilometers. Well, if you start from somewhere like Ola Pristan, for example, and begin an operation to liberate Crimea, a ground operation, then you already need to cross to the left bank, land troops, or force the Dnipro heading towards Skadovsk. But from Skadovsk to Crimea, it's 50 kilometers by sea. Believe me, boats can make it in an hour and a half, 2 hours. That's when a real threat would arise. Right now, there really is a threat for the Russians, and they understand this perfectly well too. If there's an airborne assault well, with an airborne assault using helicopters or planes, even if you dig some defensive positions, they'll just fly right over them, and that's it. So for now, to sum up what the Russians are doing, they're just wasting their time on nonsense. That's about it. By building these fortifications, they're at least getting some exercise in the end. You could say they'll be healthier for it.
Roman Grigorievich, Yuri Butusov posted a video and wrote that there was an attempt by Russian occupiers to cross the Dnipro in the temporarily occupied part of Kherson region, but it ended before it even began. They were all destroyed. Please give us your assessment.
Such attacks have been happening every day for the past several months, and there are several attacks each day. Not all of them make it into the video stream. And Yura Butusov, who used to be a competent military journalist, now he's fighting, so he can create this kind of video footage, and we're very grateful to him for that. Why? Because he's been fighting for 12 years, since 2014, and he knows it all very well. So his way of presenting material is very concise and to the point. That's why. But again, I repeat, there are several such attacks every day, and this has been going on for several months in a row. The Russian left bank group has been tasked with carrying out harassing strikes on the right bank. In other words, they're trying to gain a foothold somewhere on the right bank. First, step by step, they try to take full control of the islands, especially in the lower reaches of the Dnipro. We thoroughly work over every island, inside and out. Drones and our artillery, sometimes aviation. So along this direction, roughly from the Kingisepp Spit to Kakhovka along the left bank, the Russians are constantly trying to break through to the right bank. They keep going there. They understand perfectly well that it's a one-way ticket. Not every bird can make it to the middle of the Dnipro, if anyone remembers. It's the same picture here. And not every Russian even dares to try to swim to the middle of the Dnipro. Whether it's freestyle, breaststroke, or doggy paddle, they try to swim back when their boat gets destroyed, and they're left alive when the boat they were trying to use to cross to the right bank is hit.
Roman Grigorievich, let's move on to our favorite segment, explosions on Russian territory. So Ukrainian long-range kamikaze drones attacked the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan. There are factories there, including the production of Shahed drones, also known as Geran-2. What do you think?
Geran-2, also known as Podsomnuk 200, but this needs to be clearly understood, because when people say Geran-2 is the same as Shahed, let me tell you, there is not a single component of Iranian origin in the Geran-2S. Why? Because after disassembling all these Gerans that come to us, either the components are made by Progress, which is a Russian company, mostly electronics, or they're all Chinese, the majority is Chinese. Some components and assemblies are old French, old Americanos. You can now buy by the kilo for a single hryvnia at flea markets. They're used as well. The carbon fiber body is Russian, plus there are some so-called parachute systems for recovery that are Belarusian from Belavia. So in Vitebsk, there's a factory, and some of those drones that are designed to return the so-called reconnaissance drones use Belarusian parachutes. That's why the Geran-2 is a Chinese, Russian, and Belarusian version with some French and American parts mixed in. There's absolutely nothing Iranian about it. So this whole Shahed label should be dropped, and we should start referring to it specifically as Russian-Chinese production. Why am I clarifying this? Or rather, why am I emphasizing this point? Because those Israeli airstrikes on Iranian factories producing Shaheds will have no impact whatsoever on the production of Gerans made from Chinese components. These are now two completely separate lines of production. After Hosseini Mukhtar Ahmadinejad was elected president of Iran as a politician with at least a pro-European orientation. After he was elected, Russia has not received any military assistance from Iran on our side. There are no Iranian missiles. Not a single Iranian missile has been launched at Ukrainian territory. Ask anyone you like. Not a single Iranian one. There were Korean ones. There were Chinese, old Soviet meaning Russian ones. There were no Iranian ones. And there haven't been any Shaheds for a long time now. Maybe back in the day, at the very beginning, under the previous president, there were some connections at least. Now it's purely Chinese. What am I saying? Even if you completely destroy all Shahed production in Iran, the production of Gerans won't stop. And in order to destroy the production of Gerans, our armed forces are doing the right thing. They're destroying the assembly plants. Right now, they're still in Alabuga, but soon they should reach Izevsk. The Chinese have already built a plant in Izevsk as well. And now the Chinese are building a plant to produce something like Geran 4Ss or 5S or whatever they end up calling them, Shenzhou or something like that. It doesn't matter in North Korea. Right next to themselves, really, there are several hundred kilometers of shared border between China and North Korea. And between North Korea and Rushao, you could say the far eastern Ukrainian People's Republic, since Vladivostok is nearby Zelyony port, it's just a few dozen kilometers along the Tumanaya River. That's precisely why all the unmanned aerial vehicles or drones that come to us are either of Russian-Chinese manufacture, such as those very same Geran drones, or they are still of Israeli origin and production. At one time, Israel built a factory in Russia for the production of heavy reconnaissance drones, heavy unmanned aerial vehicles, which they still use to this day, including the fact that the same Lancet is Israeli. That's why there are problems with perceiving this whole reality at the moment. Nothing Iranian is flying at us. So all the strikes on Iran, for us, they bring us absolutely nothing. But what we do need to destroy is the Chinese, Korean, and Russian equipment. The more, the better. The strike was actually not bad for a first attempt. They tried to drop an aerial bomb on Alabuga. And this is our drone, or rather, it's our light aircraft converted into a drone, the so-called A-22 Aeropract, which is now learning to drop aerial bomb. Well, they say it's a 250 kilogram bomb, but that's unlikely because such a heavy bomb is hard for them to carry far. I think it's a 100 kilogram one, the so-called Fab 100. So it wasn't a precise hit. They didn't hit the building. The aerial bomb landed on the lot, that is the parking area for vehicles, at least those belonging to the workers of this plant who are directly involved in assembling these Gerans. I think about a dozen Chinese workers, to put it mildly, were scared out of their wits after that strike. I don't know if they'll go back to China or not, but I think this won't be the last strike.
Roman Grigorievich, the AFU attacked the occupiers' airbase in the Voronezh region. There's video of the impact, everything's on fire. What could have been targeted there? So enemy tactical aviation fueled the runway?
Well, that's probably Buturlinovka. So most likely, yes, it was a strike. Yes, there was a strike on the airfield. Russian tactical aviation is stationed there. It's a forward airfield for army aviation, for Russian helicopters. There are so-called transit depots there. So naturally, the main targets are the airfield technical equipment of any level, at least the ground-based ones, plus fuel and lubricants depots. Where was the strike directed? Well, there is already confirmation. The General Staff has confirmed that the strike was successful, at least. So this is part of the systematic work of our armed forces to destroy Russian military facilities.
Roman Grigorievich, we need to attack the enemy's military airfields, fuel, runways, and both tactical and strategic aviation every night, or at least several times a week. Is that correct, to make it truly effective?
A systematic approach, if there is no systematic approach, the Russians have time to repair everything. And it does us no good, in fact, it does more harm, because drones are simply written off. Systematic action depends on whether there is aviation at a particular airfield, on the use of engineering services, that is, special engineering units for preparing missiles and equipment. Our intelligence knows all of this. So when there is planned work, and right now, you can see that the work is indeed being carried out according to a plan. Every day, every night, every other day, we go on air with you and we talk specifically about the planned operations of our army. Now, the armed forces have taken this on, the special services, and the armed forces are engaged in systematic work to destroy military targets. We also absolutely need to add back the destruction of Russian oil refineries. Any Russian oil refinery is a legitimate military target since it produces diesel, gasoline, and aviation kerosene for the Russian army.
Roman Grigorievich, last night the Oryol region was attacked, and there is a huge amount of video footage from there. I looked into which military facilities are located there. What could have been hit by the armed forces of Ukraine?
Well, according to the information provided, at least by Russian public channels, everything was being shot down over the oil refinery. So we hope we'll confirm this next time. For now, the General Staff hasn't confirmed anything. We hope that finally this was the army's work, a military operation. In other words, there's no hope left for the special service. The Maluk-Budanov sanctions, which were previously used for strikes on oil refineries, have fizzled out. Well, guys, you went in the wrong direction. You gave up. Now, there is hope that our armed forces, specifically the Ukrainian army, are starting to strike, including at oil refineries. This is very important for us. Why? We are accomplishing two tasks. First, we are bleeding the Russian army dry, preventing them from getting fuel for movement, aviation kerosene for aircraft flights. Second, this concerns the Russian military economy because the Russians receive $1/3 of $1 trillion from their oil and gas industry. $1/3 of $1 trillion, now they will be getting even more, about twice as. Why? Because the little war in the Middle East, which Israel started, will allow the Russian oil industry to double its profit. And that comes down on our heads. And after that, we'll be hit with North Korean KN-23S. And those North Korean half-dead drones will reappear, the ones Putin will buy with those petrodollars. So this will be a problem for us because in order to prevent it, in order to protect our soldiers and Ukraine, including all of Ukraine from Russian airstrikes, we need to destroy the hydrocarbons, completely burn them down to zero. So right now, just think about it. The Ukrainian army now needs to help Russian partisans destroy the Russian hydrocarbon industry. This is what we've come to. Can you imagine? With all these dances around the fire, only it's not clear what for.
Drones attacked Nevinomysky Azot, a plant in the Stavropol region, and in Russia's Samara region, the Novokuybishevsk catalyst plant was attacked. It is part of the Rosneft structure. Roman Grigorievich?
These are chemical plants, so-called chemical industry plants. Both of them produced additives. There are certain additives for aviation kerosene, some for increasing, say, density or for temperature. There are a lot of chemical materials that are manufactured only at chemical industry plants. These are purely military facilities because their products are used, for example, in the production of carbon fiber for the Geran 2. So naturally, it is necessary to destroy not only the production of the Geran drones themselves in Alabuga, and it is also necessary to destroy the production of this carbon fiber or additives for carbon fiber at chemical plants in Russia. This is also systematic work. I want to emphasize this once again. Finally, planned operations have begun. This feels like the chief of the general staff. This is Gnatov at work. In other words, the new chief of the general staff is doing an excellent job. You can sense a systematic approach in the work of our long-range strike capabilities now.
Roman Grigorievich, a video has surfaced showing the crash of a Russian Su-25 near Soledar. Everyone is saying that it was most likely shot down by another Russian aircraft. What do you think? As I understand it, there have been a lot of these plane crashes among the Russians lately, right?
Well, there are many reasons, especially with the Su-25 STs, 40-year-old grandpas that are still somehow carrying out combat missions. We fly them too, by the way. They're not bad planes. They're actually quite stable. But when flying in pairs well, they can fall apart on their own, just by themselves. But when flying in pairs, especially when firing together, what I noticed is that you can't shoot the way they did. The thing is, the wingman almost shot down the lead aircraft. And it's not like he was aiming at him. The thing is, they were firing nurses, so-called unguided rockets. Unguided aerial rockets, also called UARs, where we call them nurse. So when the wingman fires a nurse, if, for example, the stabilizers don't deploy, if even one of them fails to open the rocket, immediately veers off course. And most likely what happened was that the lead aircraft was hit by exactly such a nurse, with a stabilizer that failed to deploy. In other words, they just rushed it, the wingman hurried to fire, and he should have waited until the lead aircraft moved aside. Only after that should he have fired. But as it turned out, he basically fired almost simultaneously with the lead. So this is a technical error in piloting technique and a mistake in combat application in this case. And most importantly, as we've already discussed, well, what kind of fool flies on Friday the 13th? Go ahead, find one. See, one fool made it, or maybe two.
I apologize. So does this really matter to pilots? Seriously now, no jokes. These dates, Fridays, are you trolling or do you mean it?
Not at all. For pilots, it really does matter a lot. Pilots will go out of their way to avoid the black cat, especially when they're on their way to the airfield. On the 13th, as far as I remember, we flew actually. No one flew on the 13th. That was our payday. There were no aircraft with the number 13, no call signs with 13. For example, my call sign was 00057, 00057. But there was never a 00013. So there just weren't such call signs. So this isn't trolling, not at all. This is exactly the kind of issue that society brings into decision-making, even for pilots. Sometimes it's a matter of split seconds. And it really is just fractions of a second. And when it's not even about saving someone, but about the decisions the flight crew has to make, sometimes just making a decision to fly on the 13th or on an aircraft numbered 13 or with a call sign 13 already puts a person's mind into a different mode, especially if they are all pilots.
Roman Grigorievich, you and I always assess the situation very professionally. You never let emotions take over. And I would like us to approach the next piece of information from a military perspective professional. So a huge number of American media outlets are now suddenly starting to report these are being quoted by Ukrainian Telegram channels. I would like everything to be without panic. Here, the Washington Post is quoting Ukrainian sources. Sumy will be wiped off the face of the earth if Russia advances 10 or 15 kilometers into the city. In this way, enemy artillery will be brought into Sumy. Only 5 kilometers remain until this threat. I read this news this morning in all the Telegram channels. I would like our audience to have calm confidence in our armed forces of Ukraine. Please assess this information soberly and share your evaluation with our dear respected audience.
Well, the thing is, Sumy is a very large city in terms of area. It covers a very large territory. To wipe it off the face of the earth, well, regular army artillery is not enough. That is, if you want to wipe Sumy off the face of the earth, you would need to send in heavy bombers, dropping hundreds of free-falling aerial bombs. If you've seen footage, for example, of the bombing of Dresden in the last century, that's about what it would look like. There's simply no other way. You can't wipe a city off the map with artillery, especially not with regular army artillery. So whenever this kind of position starts to come up somewhere, you have to ask, why even bother spreading this nonsense? First of all, army artillery is definitely dangerous for deep strikes, meaning within the operational range of army artillery. What is the operational range of army artillery? The range is mainly 15 kilometers. And artillery isn't always positioned right on the front line. Sometimes it's set back 5 or even 10 kilometers. So in order for army artillery to wipe Sumy off the map, they'd have to move along the front through Sumy together with the artillery. For example, right now they're messing around in Vovchansk, wiping it out, no questions there. But Vovchansk is several times smaller than Sumy, and they've been at it for a second year. That's one. Second, getting close to Sumy is very difficult. Why are the Russians moving so cautiously around Sumy right now? Because they're still wandering around the meadows and fields. They haven't reached the forests or the tree lines yet. That is, our main fortified areas are in the forests, in the tree lines. I mean, what fool would dig a defensive fortification out in the open field, knowing full well that in the field you'll get hit for sure because you stand out like a Christmas tree. But right now, the Russians are in the fields and we're taking them out there in batches by the company every day in that direction. So at the moment, Sumy is absolutely not under any threat at this moment. For Sumy to be threatened, the Russians would have to send another 50 to 70,000 troops there. Right now, it's simply impossible for them to come up with those numbers from any. The main question is, why would they even do that? There's such a thing as strategic perspective. So there is absolutely no strategic perspective for advancing on Sumy. An advance on Kyiv is 300 kilometers. They've been crawling from Luhansk to Pokrovsk for 11 years. That's 160 kilometers. If you apply that pace to Kyiv, how long would it take them to get there? 24 years? Well, that was actually the best pace the Russians managed from Luhansk to Pokrovsk. So there is absolutely no strategic perspective whatsoever. What's happening now in the Sumy area is the creation of a front line. And sometimes this front line is even initiated by us. This is very important for us. We need to establish a front line between Ukraine and Russia so that there isn't another incursion into Chernihiv, Sumy, or Kyiv. And before Kyiv, there are still Nedrikhailiv, Prailuki, Novi Baikiv, Basan, Brovary. I'm just recalling these from the map approximately. So in order to prevent this, we need to create a front line in the northern front needs to be established. And it is currently being formed on both sides. The further advance of the Russians in the Sumy area will be similar to what happened in Kharkiv. The Kharkiv grouping there was much stronger. They got stuck in Lipsy near Kharkiv and got stuck in Vovchansk. The same thing will happen here near Sumy, where they're milling around now. They'll just be taken out in those fields. They're running around like rabbits, and they're really being eliminated in droves. We just need to reinforce that area, maybe with more strike units. That's all that needs to be done in that direction.
Dear audience, Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week on my YouTube channel, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So please support us by liking this video. In the comments, please write a few kind words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine, and also let us know where you're watching from. We work for an audience all over the world so that people know the truth about Russian aggression, about Russia's war against Ukraine. That's why every comment, every like from you is priceless. And please, I am grateful to you for that.